This episode is made possible by PwC. When unprecedented times are all the time, it's time to start walking the talk. Leaders like you turn to PwC to see and stay ahead. Upskill your workforce, use intelligent automation, and transform big ideas into breakthrough outcomes. Explore the human-led, tech-powered solutions that help you thrive. It's all part of The New Equation. Learn more at thenewequation.com.
So Russell Targ wrote back to Ted Owens, and he said that was an excellent prediction. Ted Owens wrote back to them again and said that was no prediction at all. I caused it.
Jeffrey Mishlove wrote a book about Ted Owens. Ted Owens, known as PK Man, is an absolutely fascinating story. This is, 4 a.m. for you? So I appreciate you getting up early in the morning to share this, because this is a phenomenal story.
Pleasure to be with you.
This was a book that you let sit, 20 years? You figured when you first approached people with it, it was just not the right time to put it out. So give us the background on how you met the guy and then what transpired.
Well, the story begins in 1976 when I was a graduate student in parapsychology at UC Berkeley, working on an individual interdisciplinary doctoral program in parapsychology. And my friends, Hal Putoff and Russell Targ, who were down on the peninsula here in the San Francisco Bay Area working at SRI International, had perfected a methodology they called remote viewing, and they invited me to come and experience it firsthand, which I did. I did my very first remote viewing experiment then, and while I was with them, they showed me this large file they had about Ted Owens, and they were very impressed with him because he had been writing to them, and they had achieved some notoriety because of their work with the Israeli psychic Uri Geller, and he wrote to them basically saying, you shouldn't be wasting time with Uri Geller. I'm the world's greatest psychic, and to prove it to you, he said, I'm going to end the drought, which was going on at that time in the San Francisco Bay Area. He said, and you'll know that I'm ending it because it'll have some of my signature phenomenon will occur. There'll be rain and sleet and hail and snow and every kind of weather phenomenon, and there'll be UFO sightings and power blackouts as well, and one of your local newspapers will publish an article saying that the drought is officially over. Well, all of that happened within a matter of days. And so Russell Targ wrote back to Ted Owens, and he said that was an excellent prediction. Ted Owens wrote back to them again and said that was no prediction at all. I caused it. And at that point, they were a little bit frightened. Maybe was the was the word, because they were under contract with the CIA, and they felt that they had already gained too much publicity from working with Uri Geller, who was another flamboyant psychic. They couldn't afford to have such a colorful person as Ted Owens working with them, and they knew he seemed to have some unusual abilities, so they basically begged me to take on this case and get it out of their office so they didn't have to deal with it. And I was an eager graduate student, and I took it on. I was sort of oblivious as to what risks it might have for my career. In retrospect, I suppose I can say it worked out.
Reading his book, and at one point he thought this was nature talking to him, and then he realized in his book, when you read this stuff, that it was aliens. And
yes.
That's when it gets a lot more colorful. And then he's saying the aliens are making this happen, but this is a way for him to get everybody's attention.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I heard you talk about on an interview was when he called and said they can't launch the Challenger.
Yes, that's right. That occurred 10 years after I had been working with him. I started working with him in 1976, And this would have been right around Christmas, 1985. And at that point, I'd been working with Ted Owens for 10 years, and he had disappointed me because he made a number of predictions or demonstrations, as he called them, that didn't work out so well. And but one day, he called me up. He said, "Jeffrey, this is the most important phone call you will ever receive. It's up to you now. You have to contact the U.S. government and make sure that they don't launch the space shuttle that was scheduled for about a month away." He said, "Because if they launch it, my UFOs are going to knock it out of the sky." And I ignored him because, well, first of all, I didn't know who to contact in the government, and they weren't about to listen to me in any case.
That might have gotten you in bigger trouble with your career. just saying.
Yeah, perhaps so. But then a few weeks later, when the Challenger explosion occurred, I felt sort of shaken to my bones. Yeah. I realized that maybe at least I'd been ignoring Ted Owens for too long. And I arranged at that point to take his training program that he offered so that I could understand better what he did.
Now, he goes into this because I've got the book that he wrote. I also have a couple of other things, the Roth system for memorization, and then it's self-hypnosis. Those two things were part of his training, that
yes,
strong mental ability. And he said that in terms of his contact with the SIs, the other intelligences, that it claims to be the first person since Moses who was able to receive the intense connection from them without frying and going off the deep end. What did you learn from taking his training?
Well, he asked me when the training started, and I actually recorded it, so I still have the audio recordings from the training. And he said, "Well, what do you want to do with this power once you have it?" He said, "You need to form a conscious intent in your mind." And I realized that he was known for calling up UFOs or raising storms, affecting the weather, power blackouts, tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes. I didn't want to do any of that. And I told him that my goal really is to become an effective communicator to the mainstream public at large about the realities of psychic phenomenon and esoteric thought. That's, in fact, what I did do. Within 6 months of taking the training program, I launched the original Thinking Aloud TV series, and it had a run on the satellite over North America. We were on the air every week for 15 years, at one time carried by 100 stations. And in fact, now that I've launched the new Thinking Aloud YouTube channel, I'm still more or less carrying on with that original purpose. And I hope that your listeners have an opportunity to visit newthinkingaloud.com, spelled ALLOWED, all one word, newthinkingaloud.com.
And the other thing, too, though, with this stuff with Ted, there were some other implications. If he had a temper and was a little bit miffed at somebody, was it Japan? He went over and they made fun of him, and he was going to end the drought there. Somebody said the wrong thing. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm remembering a volume of stuff that I've read on this. But that at that point, then he caused a drought. Fires. He was fired. He was going to relieve the drought with the rain, and they made fun of him. Somebody did, and then
This was California. He showed up in where I live in the San Francisco area, and we were having another drought, a bigger drought, and he barged into the offices of the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner, the big local newspapers, unannounced, uninvited, and to tell the local reporters that he, the great PK man, was here to end the drought. And the guards in the lobby threw him out. That's when he decided that he had to teach the people of California a lesson.
Jeffrey Mishlove and the fascinating and incredibly gifted Ted Owens, the PK Man, here on Wendy's Coffee House. If you have ever wondered whether or not we can affect reality with our mental abilities, PK, this guy might give you a little proof. Ted Owens, Jeffrey Mishlove, who studied Ted for about 10 years. Why don't more people know about this? This is absolutely astonishing, the stuff that he was able to do. Not only that, he was in contact with, he tried to make it as widely known as possible with people who are considered officials. And then later on, when you read some of the books and say that these are the people you don't want to contact, the media, the government, and the military, okay? We're going to go back into if you got on his bad side. We were talking before the break about him coming out. I didn't realize it was California. It got lost in all the mush here. But he had an attitude. The people were making fun of him, so he says, okay, here, lesson time.
And that happened over and over and over again because, especially back then, but even today, if you go and tell people, I have the power to control the weather, I am the unique ambassador to Earth from the UFOs, people are going to laugh and ridicule you. And every time that happened, he said to himself, well, that person was rude to me. They need to be taught a lesson. And so in my files, I still have evidence of 168 different demonstrations that Ted Owens performed over the years. He would send me letters in advance, postmarked, saying, this is what I intend to do. And then he would send me newspaper clippings showing that what he had promised generally happened. And I found that maybe two-thirds of these worked out the way he said they would, and the odds of any one happening was very rare, like easily less than 1 in 100.
Okay.
And many times people were hurt.
There was another thing, too, in terms of him being in contact with the powers that be. I think it was Johnson. Somebody said, have you been in contact? Does he know about this? And he said, well, if he read my letters, he does. Do you know anything about the contact that he had or the results of that? Is this anything that you were able to look into?
You mean inside the government? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, he worked very hard to interest the CIA and the military in his work. He sent letters to many people in the government, but to my knowledge, they ignored him.
And when you're talking with the guys that was at the SI, those guys who generously gave you their project.
Put off and target SRI International. There were about a dozen scientists who paid attention to Ted Owens. One of them was, for example, the very famous UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek. And on one occasion, I hosted a meeting of researchers to talk about what should be done. And Hynek was visiting San Francisco at the time, and we arranged for him to show up. And his attitude was not very different from most of the others. He said, I don't want to go near him with a 10-foot pole because, according to Hynek, the phenomena that Ted Owens produced were manifestations of the subconscious mind, and they were completely unreliable.
That is where it gets really complicated, because it was obvious that he's able to do something, but with his temper, you didn't want to be on his bad side. There was a sports thing where supposedly, he could create, interestingly, I don't know if you want the word synchronistic, coincidental, refer to that, because that's also fascinating.
Well, he liked to, on a Saturday afternoon, sit in his living room with 2 or 3 TV sets going so that he could watch several different sporting events, and he'd be drinking whiskey. He was a big drinker. And he would sit there and try to influence all of the sports teams simultaneously. And he felt that what he was really good at was causing them to fumble, causing them to make mistakes. So he would pick a team that he wanted to win, and then he'd launch what he called a PK attack against his opponents. And he often would announce in advance the teams that he was supporting, And he would pick the underdog teams, typically, to try to support. And he had a good track record. There was a researcher working for Mensa, the organization of people with high intelligence. His name was Dr. Max Fogel. And Ted Owens did several demonstrations for him, including one with sports teams. And Fogel said, yeah, he's 75% accurate in assisting the teams, causing the underdog teams to win in various athletic events.
75% accurate. That's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Owens said, I would have been more accurate, but I can't help it if I cause the other team to fumble and they can't take advantage of...
You can't make everybody else play better, huh?
Yeah, that was his point. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to bring that up because that made it even more obvious that this guy's doing things you really don't want to be on his bad side because he's so temperamental and a loose cannon that even though the space folks that supposedly he's contacting are saying, we're here for the benefit of mankind, we want you to be nicer, and we want you to be, we don't hurt us, and we'll show up, and we're trying to make sure you guys don't nuclear war yourselves into oblivion. But then here's Ted running amok.
Well, many people regard him as a hero today because even though he ran amok, at times when people treated him well, you would see positive effects, droughts that were eliminated, for example.
Well, and the healing.
Mm-hmm. Many people believed that he was a healer and came to him for healing.
Okay, so all of this stuff, what do we learn from Ted Owens?
Well, I would say one of the lessons that I learned is to always treat every other person with respect, because you never know when you run into somebody that they might have psychokinetic abilities of that sort. And I always did treat Ted Owens with respect, and we got along fine. I was able to do research with him for over a decade. On one occasion, he did get mad at me, because we were involved in a very impressive demonstration. He had produced some magnificent phenomenon, but not everything he said he was going to do. And I told him that. I said, Ted, you haven't done A, B, and C. And he just got really mad and hung up the phone on me. Within a few minutes, I began to get very sick. You know, that feeling of like, oh, this is going to be bad, and my throat is getting sore, and I'm probably going to have a sore throat for a week. And then 45 minutes later, he called me up. He apologized. Without saying what he had done, he said, Jeffrey, I will never do that again. And within moments, the sore throat went away.
Okay. And see, that's why this is so fascinating, because I don't believe that he's the last of his kind. I believe he's one who just happened to get a ton of publicity because that's what he wanted. Have you done some follow-up with the people who took his program?
Well, for a while, I was in touch with quite a number of those people back. And, you know, I wrote the book about 20 years ago. And so at that time, I was in touch with people. And any number of them told me that they took his training and they could go out at night and they were able to cause lights, flashing lights, to appear in the sky. That's typically what people did with his training, and they would take their friends out, and it was almost like, you know, a display. They had different names for the kinds of lights that they were able to produce.
Okay. So for people who are listening, if you're listening right now and you're curious, this is The PK Man, A True Story of Mind Over Matter by Jeffrey Mishlove. You can get it, anywhere, Amazon, online, Google, whatever. But if you want to watch the new show with Jeffrey, Thinking Aloud is back on. It's on YouTube. You can check that out. Now, what site do you recommend? Because you've got a lot of work here on the Internet.
It's true, and the new series is on a website called newthinkingaloud.com. That's all one word. New, N-E-W, thinking, T-H-I-N-K-I-N-G, and aloud, A-L-L-O-W-E-D.com.
Just to go ahead and drive home a point, my guest is Jeffrey Mishlove. He's the author of The PK Man. This man did a whole lot of work. He wasn't just wigged out completely. He insists if you want to learn to do what he did, telepathy is involved, but there are a couple of other things that you will find helpful. One is the Roth memory course. That's what he cites as part of his homework. That one and self-hypnosis. And so Ted was a very driven man. He was also extremely smart, and he could memorize magazines. Now, is this true, Jeffrey? Is that part of the background?
Well, he was a member of Mensa, and he had many different professions throughout his life. He had been a jazz drummer. He had been a bullwhip artist at a circus, and then he had a knife-throwing act. He worked for a railroad at one time as an idea man. In the military, he had been a high-speed typist and worked in office buildings. And he claimed that the alien beings, he called them the space intelligences, who worked with him, had guided his life from childhood, seeing that he had one profession after another, so that his mind was sufficiently flexible to deal with the complex symbolic system of telepathic messages so that he could communicate with them.
Well, he talks about the codes. And even when he instructs you to learn something, even if you can just do 20 words that are your code words, that will help in terms of solidifying something to make a definite contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really got involved at that level. You've become quite a student.
Well, I got my attention. I'm like, whoa! So I went out and read a few things.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, several people had experiences. One I picked up, this last one was Wayne Grover, who said the last days that Ted called him. And he had some information that he kept to himself. But before he went silent, in 1987, he said he was moving his family to upstate New York because they were going to be picked up. He was going to be picked up by the UFOs. And he sent the drawings of this non-saucer-like UFO hovering over his home, and then also newspaper clippings of this same kind of thing. And he said after that, he never heard from him.
Well, Ted Owens died in upstate New York. He was living in a farmhouse, and the neighbors reported these lights in the sky right over the farmhouse, even got into the newspapers, and at the time of his death, he died of sclerosis of the liver, as I understand, because of all of his drinking.
Yeah. Well, a friend was saying, hey, so it was the drinking that enabled him. And I said, no. You got to know the math on this. This guy trained himself with that mental acumen to be able to get these codes in place so that he knew when he got some kind of telepathic connection what they were talking about. And that's why I wanted to get with your intuition.org for people who are your president of the Intuition Network.
Well, I used to be the president of the Intuition Network. I'm no longer. It's an informal organization, and there is a website there where transcripts from over 150 of the original Thinking Aloud programs can be found on that website.
Okay, see, this is why I asked you to update with the new Thinking Aloud.
Yeah. The new Thinking Aloud has all of my more recent interviews, over 100 just in the last year.
Okay. Of all of that, is there someone, for people who are listening today, anybody who's listening right now at this moment, whether it's in the podcast or current, that you would recommend as a stepping stone from this Ted Owens content?
Well, I don't encourage people, for example, to try to cultivate psychokinesis. My concern is not that it won't work, but that maybe it will, and it may be an ability that we're not ready for yet. Ted Owens, for all of the many demonstrations that he produced, was not an example, in my opinion, of the wise use of such abilities. Many people were hurt in his demonstrations. So I'm happy to have people read the book and understand that these things are possible, but I think that some abilities are best left alone right now.
Well, and see, part of that is there's a guy I know who has some incredible abilities, and he does have an impact on his surroundings that you can see. He also uses it for healing.
Anthropologists who study shamans in different other cultures talk about the ability to control the weather being very well established in many other cultures.
Maybe we're just now and taking the baby steps to kind of corroborate that.
Perhaps so.
New Thinking Aloud, YouTube, anybody else who wants to contact you with information or things that they think might be similar to, are you open to that information if they think they've got abilities?
Well, I'm no longer doing research of that sort. I was a much younger man, but I'm happy to hear from people. I can be reached through that website, newthinkingaloud.com.
Again, the book, The PK Man, A True Story of Mind Over Matter by Jeffrey Mishlove.